The final day of autumn clung to the city, the air sharp with the scent of pine needles and impending frost. Inside the grand yet sterile conference room of Hawthorne and Associates, the tension was a physical presence, thick as the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of weak afternoon light. Gathered around the polished mahogany table were three figures: Elias, Clara, and Michael, the children of Eleanor Vance. They were dressed in expensive black, their faces a carefully crafted mask of grievance and impatience, not grief. Their mother, Eleanor, matriarch of the Vance name and a woman who had seen 94 years turn on this earth, had been laid to rest a week prior. And now they were here for the final expected ritual, the reading of the will. Elias, the eldest, tapped his Mont Blanc pen against the leather folder, a sound that cut through the silence like a scalpel. He was anxious to claim the estate's prime Manhattan brownstone. Clara, perched delicately on the edge of her chair, was already mentally redecorating the summer home in Nantucket. Michael, the youngest, leaned back with a smug confidence that betrayed years of silent resentment, assured that his recent minimal effort at visiting his mother would be generously rewarded. They had spent the last decade treating Eleanor Vance, a woman who survived the rationing of the Depression and the loss of a husband far too young, not as a mother, but as an inconvenience, a financial asset soon to be liquidated. But what they did not know, what they could not possibly imagine as the senior partner, Mr. Hawthorne cleared his throat, was that Eleanor Vance had already spent her last word. She had been silent for 10 long years as they outsourced her care, ignored her calls, and treated her once vibrant life as a diminishing stock portfolio. She watched them, not with anger, but with the profound, quiet sadness of a woman who understands a crushing truth, that true poverty is not the lack of money, but the lack of connection. This is the story of Eleanor Vance, a 94-year-old mother who, in the final act of her life, crafted a document so meticulous, so devastatingly insightful, that it would teach her abandoning children the ultimate life lesson, a lesson that was not written in clauses of cash or deeds of property, but etched in the cold, hard steel of truth. She taught them that her greatest wealth was not what she left behind, but the profound resilience she had built over 9 decades of life, a resilience they were now about to inherit in the most shocking way imaginable. This lesson of ultimate justice, delivered from the grave, is a blueprint for anyone who has ever felt overlooked, disregarded, or abandoned. Mr. Hawthorne adjusted his spectacles, the only sound the rustle of the thick, heavy paper of the original will. Elias straightened, anticipation warring with his practiced solemnity. He leaned slightly forward, ready to hear the words that would make him richer. But the words that came were not about the brownstone. They were a bomb, silently detonated. "Before we proceed to the disbursement of assets," Mr. Hawthorne began, his voice surprisingly firm, "there is a personal letter instructed by your mother to be read first in its entirety." Elias frowned. Clara stiffened. Michael's smugness faltered. They had come for cash, but Eleanor was delivering wisdom, and wisdom, when delivered by a 94-year-old matriarch, often comes with an unforeseen and utterly life-changing twist. What followed were not tender farewells, but a surgical dissection of their lives, a narrative of profound abandonment and a final crushing act of love. You are about to witness the true meaning of legacy. The senior lawyer, a man accustomed to the cold arithmetic of death and money, unfolded the letter. The paper itself felt antique, carrying a faint nostalgic scent of lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the room. It was not typed, it was penned in Eleanor's elegant, slightly shaky script, a handwriting that spanned nearly a century of history. Mr. Hawthorne began to read, and with every sentence, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Eleanor Vance, born in 1928, was a woman whose foundation was built on steel and sacrifice. Her childhood was not one of luxury, but of survival. She spoke of the depression of sharing a single loaf of bread among 5 people, of the smell of coal smoke and the terror of her father losing his job, a fear that taught her the difference between want and need long before her children ever understood either. Eleanor learned early that possessions were fleeting, but character was permanent. She built her fortune with the kind of painstaking discipline that her children, raised on instant gratification, could never fathom. She didn't just inherit wealth, she created it, brick by painstaking brick, through a successful textile import business started on a loan the size of a modern car payment. She recalled the late nights spent over ledgers, the smell of burnt coffee, and the single promise she made to herself: she would never again feel the crippling fear of having nothing. That promise, however, had twisted into a complex legacy for her children. They inherited the wealth without inheriting the wisdom that created it. The children, now trapped in this unexpected private inquisition, shifted uncomfortably. Elias, the real estate mogul, adjusted his tie, his face slightly flushed. He wanted to interrupt, to demand the legal clauses, but the lawyer's measured tone was impossible to penetrate. Clara, the socialite, felt a sting of guilt she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The memory of cancelling a planned holiday visit to attend a charity gala felt suddenly exposed. Michael, still maintaining his cool facade, felt the familiar prickle of irritation. He believed his mother had always been overly dramatic. Why now? Why couldn't she just leave the money and leave the drama behind? The letter continued, shifting from historical context to the direct conflict of the present. "I always taught you," Mr. Hawthorne read, Eleanor's voice echoing through his own, "that true value is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you are willing to give. But you, my darlings, seem to only learn the first part of the lesson." She described in unflinching detail the last 10 years, the missed birthdays, the calls that went unanswered, the holidays spent alone watching the snow fall on a house too large for one aging woman. She didn't list grievances, she listed facts. The sterile smell of the assisted living facility she was moved to, the hurried 5-minute visits punctuated by questions about her assets, the slow, agonizing realization that their concern for her well-being was solely conditional on the size of her estate. And here was the crushing truth of the core conflict, the fundamental problem that this final letter sought to solve. The children's entire life view was based on the premise that their mother's primary value was her money. They had effectively abandoned the vessel of wisdom, the 94-year-old mother who could have given them the secret to true, lasting prosperity, in favor of the temporary illusion of wealth. Eleanor, a woman who understood survival, knew she had to teach them a lesson that only pain and the ultimate twist of fate could deliver. They sought cash, she would give them clarity. They sought assets, she would give them a mirror. This letter wasn't just a part of the will, it was the entire foundation of a long-overdue reckoning, a seismic shift in their reality that was about to hit its first major shockwave. The scent of lavender from the letter was now almost overwhelming, a ghost of Eleanor's presence filling the corporate space. The narrative shifted from historical recollection to the intricate, heartbreaking details of her personal life. She spoke of her marriage to their father, a man who, like her, believed in hard work and integrity, but his life was tragically cut short, leaving Eleanor a widow at 45 with 3 young children and a burgeoning business. This was not a moment of collapse, it was the crucible of her resilience. She recalled the brutal exhaustion of those years, running the business during the day, attending school functions at night, and then spending hours alone, battling the ledgers and the loneliness. Fueled only by the absolute necessity of securing their futures, she remembered the feel of the heavy velvet curtains in the grand parlor of the brownstone, a home she had fought tooth and nail to keep, not for the status, but because she saw it as a fortress of safety for her children. Yet as the years passed, that fortress became a museum of her own memories. The cold marble of the entryway seemed to mirror the emotional distance the children kept. She noted the small things, the precise moment Elias stopped asking her advice on business, the moment Clara started measuring her time in minutes, not hours, the moment Michael began treating their conversations like an annoying transaction. Eleanor, who had built a fortune reading the subtle shifts in the global textile market, was equally astute at reading the human heart. She knew when her love was returned, and she knew when it was merely tolerated. For years she played the part they expected, the quiet, financially stable matriarch, observing, analyzing, and waiting. She used her long life, her 94 years, not just to exist, but to understand the profound decay of character that can accompany inherited wealth. The greatest fear of her life, ending up with nothing, had ironically become the foundation of her children's greatest entitlement. Then came the first major twist. Mr. Hawthorne paused, and the rustle of the document signaled a shift in tone. This was no longer a personal reflection, it was a devastating disclosure. Elias, Clara, Michael, the lawyer read, Eleanor's voice cutting the air with surgical precision. For the past 18 months, you have been under the impression that the Manhattan brownstone, the house you so carelessly left me alone in, was the most valuable liquid asset of my estate. You were correct, it was, but you were incorrect to assume it was yours. A collective gasp escaped the three children. Elias shot forward, his face pale beneath his tan. What are you saying, Mr. Hawthorne? That's impossible. The deed is in the family trust. The lawyer, unruffled, held up a single crisp paper, a legally executed deed transfer. He continued reading Eleanor's elegant script. The house was sold 18 months ago to the largest charitable foundation I supported. The proceeds, the entirety of the multi-million-dollar sale, were transferred to a specific permanent endowment. The only asset you currently hold connected to that property is the memory of the few, hurried, and often resentful hours you spent within its walls. I did not sell it to punish you. I sold it because, at 92, I realized I did not need a monument to my success. I needed a purpose, and your abandonment of me became my final great purpose, to fund a charity that supports elderly women who have been abandoned by their own families. The silence that followed was absolute, a void filled only by the pounding hearts of the children. The foundation of Elias's financial planning had just dissolved. Clara's entitlement shattered. Michael's arrogance was vaporized. Eleanor had been watching them, fully aware, not a victim but a strategist, moving her assets in plain sight while they were too blind with greed to notice. This was her first lesson. The illusion of control is the greatest poverty of all. She had used her 94 years of wisdom to make a move that was legally flawless and emotionally catastrophic. The real game had just begun. The air turned volatile. Elias, the color of his cheeks now a dark, furious red, slammed his hand onto the table, the sound echoing harshly. This is insane, fraudulent. I demand to see the escrow documentation immediately, Mr. Hawthorne. She was not of sound mind. You are complicit. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, cracked with desperation. Clara buried her face in her hands, a low, keening sound escaping her, not grief for her mother, but agony over the lost millions. Michael simply stared, his jaw muscles twitching, calculating how much this loss would cost his own lavish lifestyle. Mr. Hawthorne did not flinch. He simply waited, allowing the raw, unfiltered shock to dissipate, proving Eleanor's point. Their reaction was not sorrow, but financial panic. Once the silence returned, thick and strained, he continued reading, his voice regaining its steady cadence. Eleanor, through the letter, addressed this precise moment of fury. I was never more sound of mind, Elias, than the day I signed those papers. That day, 18 months ago, was my greatest sacrifice and my most profound moment of clarity. She described the day in vivid, almost painful detail. It was late March. The assisted living facility window offered a view of bare grey trees. She remembered the scratchy wool of the blanket, the taste of lukewarm tea, and the sterile white walls. It was then, while holding a decades-old photo of her young, happy children, that she understood the ultimate life lesson of her 94 years. True love cannot be bought, and it cannot be forced. The beautiful brownstone, which she had protected through a depression and a war, was not a legacy. It was a bribe. And the children were demanding the payment, even as they withheld the affection. Her sacrifice was not the house. The sacrifice was the final, painful act of letting go of the life she had built for them, to save their souls from the corrosive nature of their own entitlement. She had given up the physical comfort of her home, the only place she had truly belonged, to deliver the truth. The cold, sterile reality of her abandonment had forced her into an epiphany. Her ultimate lesson of resilience was to accept that she could not change her children's hearts, but she could change their future. This leads to the second major twist. The lawyer set aside the letter, finally turning to the official bound document, the last will and testament. Now, to the distribution of the liquid assets, which I assume is your primary concern, Mr. Hawthorne stated, his voice laced with the faintest hint of irony. Elias leaned forward again, desperately clinging to the hope of the rest of the estate. The stock portfolios, the treasury bonds, the considerable cash reserves. He mentally counted the millions that could still salvage his reputation. Mr. Hawthorne began to read the formal clauses, detailing percentages and amounts, confirming the existence of a substantial remaining fortune. Relief washed over the children like a sudden cleansing wave. They had lost the house, but they had won the war. Elias allowed himself a slight, arrogant smirk. But then the lawyer lowered his voice, delivering the ultimate legal blow. However, he read from a notarized codicil, in order to ensure that the recipients of my remaining wealth fully understand the value of time and the meaning of earned inheritance, I have instructed that all liquid assets shall be held in a non-interest-bearing trust. The principal sum will be released to each of my children, Elias, Clara, and Michael, upon the completion of one requirement. Each of you must volunteer for a minimum of 40 hours per week for one full calendar year at the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Abandoned Elderly. You must log your hours, have your work verified by the director, and submit a signed, notarized weekly essay detailing the life lesson you learned that week from the residents. The remaining money was theirs, yes, but the key to unlocking it was not a signature, but suffering. A year spent confronting their own crime of abandonment, face to face with other victims, forced to listen to the very wisdom they had so carelessly ignored from their own mother for a decade. The sheer, calculated horror of this assignment, forcing them to earn the money through emotional labor and painful self-reflection, drew a silent, terrifying line across the mahogany table. The inheritance was a job, and the job was a life lesson. The silence that followed the reading of the codicil was the heaviest yet, laced not with shock, but with pure, incandescent rage that had nowhere to land. They couldn't sue their mother. The document was legally impeccable. They couldn't ignore it. They were financially ruined without the principal. They were trapped by their own greed, and now bound to the very wisdom they had discarded. Elias slumped back, defeated, the pen falling from his numb fingers. Clara let out a dry sob, realizing her Nantucket dreams had just been replaced with volunteer hours in a charity she despised. Michael's face was frozen in disbelief. A year of forced empathy was his personal hell. Mr. Hawthorne returned to Eleanor's letter, the final, poignant section where the matriarch delivered her ultimate wisdom. "My dearest children," the lawyer read, his voice softening slightly, "I have lived 94 years. I survived the fear of having nothing, and I survived the burden of having everything. My lesson, the ultimate lesson I wish to impart, is this. The greatest bankruptcy in life is not losing money. It is losing the time that could have been spent building meaningful connections." She elaborated, her words a final testament to the resilience of a woman who had seen the cycle of greed destroy too many families. When you are 94, you do not count your bank balance. You count the warmth of the hands that hold yours. When you chose to ignore my calls, you thought you were saving your time. You were, in fact, discarding the only inheritance that truly mattered, the wealth of wisdom accumulated over 9 decades. Eleanor explained the purpose of the mandatory year of service. This year you spend at the foundation is not a punishment. It is an investment. It is the cost of entry to your true legacy. You will spend 40 hours a week with men and women who, like me, were forgotten. But unlike me, many of them have nothing left. You will listen to their stories. You will learn the secret of joy from a woman who lost her sight but gained clarity. You will learn the value of tenacity from a man who rebuilt his life after losing everything in a fire 50 years ago. You will be forced to listen to the kind of wisdom you could have received freely, but instead must now earn through labor and humility. This powerful lesson, woven through the story of an abandoned mother, transcends the confines of the will and reaches directly into the heart of the viewer. This is the truth that Eleanor, a 94-year-old survivor, bequeaths to us all. The secret to true triumph is learning to find value not in what you possess, but in the experiences you collect and the resilience you forge when everything else is stripped away. Her final act was a radical application of this wisdom. She sacrificed the peace of simply leaving them cash, opting instead for the turmoil of forcing them toward character. She knew that financial wealth is temporal, but a lesson learned through sacrifice is permanent. And for us, the audience, this is the mirror. Ask yourself, are you valuing the quick return of cash over the irreplaceable return of time spent with those who hold the keys to a century of life? Eleanor's story is the ultimate reminder that you don't need a lawyer's letter to start collecting your true legacy. The wisdom is available now, if only you choose to listen. The 94-year-old matriarch's message is clear. Invest in connection, because time is the only asset truly held in trust for you. Mr. Hawthorne carefully placed the final sheet of Eleanor's letter back into the envelope. He then signed the closing documents, his professionalism returning to its usual detached severity. The inheritance was settled. The money was safe, locked away behind a barrier of humility and forced service. Elias, Clara, and Michael sat motionless, the silence now a cage built by their mother. They had arrived expecting a feast. They were leaving with a prison sentence of their own making. The lawyer stood up, signaling the official end of the reading. "You have your instructions," he stated, his gaze sweeping over their stricken faces. "The Foundation's director will be in touch tomorrow morning to schedule your first mandatory meeting. Your mother's will is final. Good day." The children rose slowly, heavy with a weight far greater than the property they had just lost. As they filed out of the room and back into the cold autumn air, their expensive suits and designer accessories suddenly seemed cheap, covering a moral emptiness that their mother's final act had cruelly illuminated. They had lost the house, they had lost the liquid cash for a year, but the deepest cut was the realization that they had lost the one person who cared enough to teach them this painful, essential lesson. The long journey home was not just a drive across the city, it was the first few steps on their mandatory year-long road towards self-reckoning. Did Eleanor Vance truly win? Her body was in the ground, but her 94 years of hard-won wisdom was suddenly and violently alive. She had ensured that her final legacy was not a monument of stone and glass, but a living, breathing charity dedicated to protecting the forgotten and the forced, brutal education of her own children. She had converted their greed into charity and their abandonment into mandatory empathy. It was the ultimate defiant act of a mother who refused to leave the world until her children finally truly listened. The tension of the conference room fades, replaced by the profound, open-ended question that hangs in the air. Will they learn the lesson? Will a year of mandatory self-reflection and service truly be the life-changing twist that Eleanor prayed for? Or will they spend their hours serving the elderly, counting the minutes and nursing their hatred, only to retrieve their millions without having gained a soul? The truth lies in the year to come, a year of service, of listening, and of potential. Redemption, a year where they will come face to face with the resilience that money can never buy, the very resilience their 94-year-old mother had tried one final time to teach them. This story of Eleanor's will is a stark reminder that legacy is not written in paper, but in character. It is a testament to the profound power of wisdom gained over time, the kind of wisdom that waits patiently for decades, then strikes with unforgiving clarity when it matters most. If Eleanor Vance's ultimate lesson, that time and connection are the only true currency, resonated with you, then it means you too understand the value of a life well lived. Don't wait until 94 to learn this lesson. Start now. Show your support for the wisdom of the elders by subscribing to the Triumph Stories. We are dedicated to sharing the enduring resilience and life lessons of those who have seen a century turn. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another profound story that can change your life today. Help us ensure that the greatest wisdom of the past never becomes the silent regret of the future. Thank you for listening.